Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Pat.
I'm Pat Kent on behalf of Raison d'Être Opera Company, which is a opera company in the Twin Cities for seasoned performers. I'm a board member and singer, and I'm here with our artistic director, Gary Briggle, who is an esteemed veteran director, singer, and actor. And today we are engaged in operatic time travel. We had an assignment over the weekend, and we both attended the lovely production of Elixir of Love from the Minnesota Opera. And so what we'd like to talk about today is the work of the director in taking works from the opera canon and operatic canon, I should say, so we don't think it's the boom kind, and revitalizing it for a modern audience. So operas are created in a historical context, but not always a contemporary one. If we take Verdi's Macbeth, for instance, that production of an already centuries-old story reflect Shakespeare's imagined Scottish landscape or the style of 19th century Italy. And what did audiences expect? This puts us squarely in the realm of reception theory, which I love talking about. But I'm going to steer clear because we could be talking about that all day. There certainly has been audience resistance to updated opera, although it seems that American audiences have, to some extent, moved beyond grudging acceptance. I just want to tell this story about taking a group of students to Simone Boccanegra in Rome. I had a choice of no opera or Simone Boccanegra, and it was Opera Roma, and I thought, oh my God, it's going to be a hard sell. Opera is a hard sell with students who are not music majors anyway. And we had spent, all this time talking about opera, and it was a beautifully sung opera. It was boring as hell. It was the staging, the costumes, the whole manner of the production was so much in the model of what you would have seen, I don't know, in the 60s in America, maybe. And I converted no students from that production, zero. And I thought, well, modernizing opera has really, America, let's say, Germany, places that have really invested in modernizing settings of opera, let's say, or reconceptualizing opera, have done a lot for opera. I think I didn't even realize how much until I saw that production. And I think we agree if that form we love is going to endure, it needs to be continuously refreshed. In the words of Daniel Ellis, who is the stage director for Minnesota Opera's production of the Elixir of Love, which is still going on, and you should go see it. A primary goal is to contextualize the work in a way so that it is historically, emotionally, and ethically accessible to the artists and the audience. So with that in mind, Gary, do you think that some operas are easier to recontextualize than others? Is there some magic in a score or libretto that makes it easier to place in a modern context or an updated context?
Yes, so long as the opera itself, when carefully examined, can be transposed or transported in ways that honor the behaviors of the characters. I've learned that it can get tricky when you're dealing with issues of the ways that men and women treat one another if you get too rigid about the world that you're in. But you have to pay close attention to detail. And so I don't think all operas should be, need to be, and can be updated.
Okay. You and I had discussed a little bit the radical restaging of Peter Sellers' Mozart operas, especially the one I remember is the Don Giovanni, kind of set in this burned out hellscape of New York in the 70s and 80s, which just I found incredibly compelling. And I kept asking myself, why does this work? You know, if you were setting something like that, would you be tempted at all to mess with the score or the orchestration?
Um, just as a matter of personal taste as a director, I tend not to do that.
Mhm.
I think there is a certain counterintuitive thing that can happen where the score sounds very much 18th century and the behaviors are very much 21st century. But I think the secret to making that work is the commitment of everyone involved to the new time and place. That being said, Pat, I did direct the Peter Brook Carmen, the tragedy of Carmen,
Okay.
which has been deconstructed and turned into a 90-minute examination of a series of love triangles and completely reorchestrated because of the scale of the production. It has no chorus, no little children running around.
Mhm.
And to me, that seems like a very good example of an opportunity to look at orchestral color, proportion, even emphasis through orchestration.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm thinking of some of the Theater La Da productions where the orchestra is really reduced. And I think sometimes it works better than others, but I think it can be done um, and still have a flavorful um, adaptation.
Well, it's so true. I think, again, it requires immense sensitivity, a kind of deep respect for the original
Yep.
and the equivalencies, as a word we're going to use a lot in our conversation, for this new orchestration. Similarly, translation, super title, all
Right.
of those things that pull things into a new time frame.
And that's what I was going to ask you next, because I think the most obvious element to consider after music is the text. And especially with recitative, many modernized productions of classic operas vernacularize. I made up that word, and Word did not like that I did that. Um, the text. And I can see the point of it, because if you had super titles and you were literally translating Italian or German, say for instance, that would seem very stilted. It does seem very stilted.
Yeah.
But then you say, how far is too far?
Well, I think too far might be when you attend a production where, again, you and I are kind of insiders here.
Right?
So you see the super titles come up and the director or the conductor or both, hopefully both, have decided they're going to completely hijack the moment and make the aria about something that it's not about. All the while the singer is still delivering the original text.
Yeah.
And that I object to strongly. Because that's sort of cheating. It's taking a shortcut. It's it's high time in this country, I believe, Pat, for opera companies to engage poets and dramatists to do beautiful, witty, immediate translations so that much more of our opera could be sung in American English.
Yeah. I mean, having done that, it is satisfying because you can be immediate unless you know exactly what you're saying at every minute. In other words, if you know the Italian just as well as you know your native tongue, you can do it kind of.
But it still draws a veil, I think,
Yeah.
between the moment and the audience.
Yeah.
Because, you're looking up to read a super title when you should be looking at the stage.
Mm-hmm.
And I think opera audiences are just brazen in their acceptance of the artifice of opera is an excuse for nothing authentic to happen.
There was a moment it feels like there was a moment where there was a lot of, I don't know if I can pinpoint the time when a lot of operas were being presented in translation, and we've kind of and I think, this is open for discussion. I mean, but there's now seems to be reverted to modernizing without translating, without,
Well, Minnesota Opera, as you probably remember, was founded on the principle, much like Opera Theater of St. Louis,
Mhm.
on singing everything in English. From 1965 to about 1985, the mandate was opera in English, because it needed to nestle right alongside contemporary and newly commissioned work in English. And of course, all that did was to create a particular audience that loved that. The,
yeah,
shall we say, backlash
yeah.
from the traditionalists was something no one could have expected. And that was, that's not how I ever want to hear La Traviata or La Boheme.
And that's the
And
crux of the problem right there. That's not how
well, and my
everyone.
response is, you will have 100 chances in your life to hear Verdi and Puccini in Italian. But if you see it or hear it once in English, you'll never forget the way that piece took you by the hand and led you through the drama.
That's a really good point. That's a really good point.
Well, that's why I think there always needs to be one company around daring to do that.
Do you know if there is still?
In this town,
Well, Annie, no, in the US.
Opera Theater of St. Louis would be
They
my
still do it?
flagship.
Okay. Yeah, because I wonder if there's some, I keep thinking of reception theory, if there's some reason that happened. If
Well,
it's
people with a
reflected in
lot
the
of money.
broader culture or something like that.
No. I think, typically people that went to opera are people with some means, because opera has
Right,
never been
right.
cheap.
Right.
But if you're doing opera in the vernacular for what might be thought of as a slightly more theatrical crowd, they might not feel the necessity to spend $125 on an opera ticket when they can roll up their sleeves, sit on a folding chair and see something a little more accessible. I'm just going to say it.
Yeah.
And I totally own my prejudice, because it was the operatic world that I was born into when I joined the Minnesota Opera Studio in 1975.
Right.
But I always, I look for companies in this town and audiences that are attracted to opera / serious music theater in English.
Cool. Me too. So what I want to ask? Okay, so what comes first if you are contextualizing, modernizing an operatic work? Is it the director's concept? Is that what comes first?
Well, yes, I think it is. Typically, it could be a director-designer team. And let us note that globally on the international opera stages, a lot of directors now are designers. Zeffirelli certainly was that. And that meant that he could design the world that he needed to do it the way he wanted to do it. As a young director, I used to think that the job of director was to conceptualize or reconceptualize everything. I will just tell you that I've learned otherwise in my own career, and now tend to spend my time squeezing all the juice out of the original setting. Because I find that, much like in the theater, you think, well, how many times does an audience need to see Hedda Gabler? Well, they need to see it until they understand it.
That's a good point.
And these pieces need to be done until, in this country, robbed of a classical education, Faust is something that everybody has in their consciousness. So, yes, it starts with the director / designer conceptualizing something. Hopefully it doesn't start with a budgetary constraint. In other words, we can't do all this scenery. Can you come up with a way for us to do it cheaply? And therefore, we'll do it in modern dress, with modern furniture, in a modern urban context that's easily, that's easy to visualize. But then the hard work starts to happen, which is, for me, a meticulous, scrupulous, moment-to-moment look at what does it mean to pull these characters into another time and place. What are their behaviors? What are they really saying?
Mm-hmm.
And what are the substitutes for the gallantries and etiquette and formality,
mm-hmm.
and, dare I say it, the very binary world of the 18th century?
Yeah.
So it's an exhausting examination, because sure as shooting, you're going to come up against something that you can be sure an audience member will grab you in the audience by the lapel at intermission and say, yeah, but now you've made this a 2021 opera, and if they had cell phones, none of this would have happened.
Uh-oh. That's a big
and yeah, there's a big snag, and sometimes you just have to say, oops.
Yeah.
But as a director, I'm not very comfortable with that kind of sloppiness. To me, what's remarkable is when it somehow manages in every way, as you're watching it, to work.
I know. Yeah. And there's a resonance there when it does. You just like.
Well, you think about Peter Sellers' Così.
Yeah.
Those roles and that role playing, he went back to the Vietnam War, which might have been the last gasp of a kind of post-World War II set of behaviors,
mm-hmm.
the way men treated women.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that mid-century world is very often the place that operas end up, that are being pulled into another time, because it's the last time that men and women treated each other that way.
That's really important. I never thought about that. That's really interesting. I'm going to chew on
it
that.
It is.
I'm going to chew on that. Yeah.
Except in very particular instances. And when operas are small and focused on a cast of 6 or 8, it's different than if the rest of the world is invited in.
Right.
Which, one of the things a lot of people love about opera is the mise en scène of the world around the central plot.
So if in this the production of Elixir that we just saw, Ellis and his design team chose to set Elixir very specifically in pre-World War I era in California. He took as his inspiration an effort, which happened actually, to save the dying California orange industry and set the tale among workers in an orchard. Adina, in this modernized context, is the owner of the orchard. So it has a very specific socio-political context. And I'm kind of wondering if you think if we're modernizing opera, if that's a necessary component or if it's dicey. Or maybe both, or depending,
I would say my opinion would be, as a director, it's always dicey,
mm-hmm.
Because it must be approached with such care and
right.
specificity. When it turns out to work like gangbusters, then the gamble really pays off.
Right.
And it might pay off more, Pat, for new audiences to opera than necessarily traditionalists.
I can see that.
I've so enjoyed both versions of The Magic Flute at the Met, the spectacularly fantastical Julie Taymor, which is as magical as anything could be, and then the flip side of the coin, this new one that reveals all the magic as artifice and still has such fun with the imagination of storytelling.
Okay, so now I have homework to do. I'll have to watch that production. But
But in terms of Elixir,
yeah,
questions that I had right away, knowing it was set in pre-World War One, were, since the music is so Italian, it's like Italian circus meets ice cream cellar meets a big bowl of pasta. It is so spaghetti and meatballs in the best way. I love it so much. It's just mouth-wateringly Italian. So this Italian community in California, question mark,
well,
you
they
know,
they were in the vineyards for sure.
yes,
But I didn't. Yeah. Okay,
yes,
all right. So let's
yeah.
go
No,
with
I
it.
mean, I'm just thinking about that, you know,
Yeah.
and I'm thinking about the ways that I certainly was intrigued by the add oranges to, you know, drink orange juice and put orange in the wine and turn it into a love potion.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
yeah.
charming. But I would have said to, you know, if someone had asked me, I would have said, well, that needs to be more of a thing then, rather than just a faintly legible poster on the side of Dulcamara's beaten up truck. It needs to be his sole sort of ad campaign.
But he's got to get behind it.
Or we need to see somewhere in the show the light bulb moment where Adina's orange groves and his love potion, Bordeaux, ding, I could put those two things together, and that could be, you know, there has to be a moment for that, I think.
So after the director's concept comes the work of the design team. We're talking
Whew.
about everything about how the production looks and feels, you know, and if you've been in shows, you know how much that when that all comes together, the magic of that. So as the director, how do you integrate costumes, props, set, all those elements to make a cohesive whole, to make a cohesive updating?
Well, it certainly is one of my favorite things about being a singer or an actor or a director, which is the voluminous research that you must do and frankly need to enjoy doing because there's no escaping it. And so I have a book I love called the Timetables of History. It's the size of an old phone book, and it gives you in categories year by year, starting in BC, what was being read, what was being written, what was being eaten, what was being decided in the halls of government and religion, in literature, who was born, who died. And it's just the beginning of an aha moment about the story you're about to tell. And for me, it sets me off on my voracious research, which also then implies the amount of time it takes to conceptualize a production. It takes months and months and months for everyone to go and do their research and then come back and share it and sift through it. Because along the way, you may discover that your time travel has a huge flaw in it. And are you going to be able to?
Then what do you do?
Right. Are you going to be able to smooth it over or not?
Yeah.
So that adds more time in allowing for the oopsie daisy moment or the yay hooray moment, depending.
Right.
But I was interested, for instance, in this Elixir production, in the sort of fairy tale aspect that everything was so pretty.
Really pretty.
Really pretty. The work clothes were pretty. The party clothes were really pretty. And I thought, I just would have wondered, I would have asked to look at the research because I wondered if the women's clothes could have been more interesting at the party, more individualized, more rush to your closet and put together an outfit rather than having one that sort of fit in with everybody else. You know what I mean?
They were really a lot of fun. I just loved that.
They were beautiful.
I love that scene so much. And it, because
Oh,
I
the
had
women were
friends in the forest, I was
fabulous.
like, you go, girl. They're just, because the girls don't get as much fun to do as the guys do, and then
Truly.
finally,
Yeah, it's a
um,
great piece for the female chorus. And they were wonderful.
they were fabulous.
They sounded great. They looked lovely.
Yeah.
They
And
had
the timing
charm
was
and
good.
spirit.
Yeah. And the comment that our friend Rick made was, to get that in comic opera, to make the comedy work, the timing has to be precise. And it really was. I just love that.
Right.
But you think,
So yeah, research.
and sometimes you'll be in a production and you go, I don't know, you know, if this all makes sense to me, and you always go along with it. But anyway, um, how singers, this leads into my next question. How singers move on stage colors our perception of the story as complete and believable. How actors move in a stylized or naturalistic way, the choice of using choreography or social dance to enhance the feel of production. All of those elements enhance our perception of authenticity in a new opera production. I'm thinking of being a chorister in Madama Butterfly, directed by Colin Graham, and the incredible detail that he gave us in terms of motion. And that's a very traditional, not modernized, but it was just it was unforgettable to me. And it felt really authentic. So if you're taking that experience and you're modernizing a production, if you can talk about a reimagined opera production that felt to you like was truly successful, where you felt all those elements came and like you nailed it, like you know it was believable to the people in the production and the people in the audience.
Well, as I say, Pat, I started my career transposing things into other times and places,
Okay.
because I thought that was what directors do. Most recently, I did a Don Giovanni, and of course, that has the big party scene with everybody doing different kinds of social dance depending on their class,
Yeah.
and it's a fabulous scene. It's as postmodern as anything could possibly be, but it's very tricky to ask people to do the Frug and the Watusi to Mozart. It can become instantly ludicrous.
Yeah.
And so what you have to do, I think, is to first look at what the original was. What did it look like when Zerlina was dancing with Mazzetto in their sort of low down country kind of way, versus what Ottavio and Donn'Anna were doing in their courtly way. And then begins the translation. And so rhythms, the clear invitation to do something Spanish, and the ways in which timeless dance gestures may move from the 18th century, or if you're really going to do Giovanni the way Mozart and the Ponte wanted, it would be 17th century Spain versus 20th century Spain. What are the commonalities? Because the story must be told, and we must see it. And then, of course, there's two other factors. One is the comfort of opera singers to dance and move while singing.
Oh yeah, been there, done that.
Yes. And unfortunately, the time that productions have to rehearse. When I started in this business, operas were typically rehearsed 6 weeks, and now they're typically produced in 3, with the same expectation of quality. So a couple things have to be in place. One is it behooves singers to continue to work on those skills so they're ready when it comes flying at them. It behooves directors and choreographers to be impeccably prepared so there is no time wasted in building a physicality, a movement vocabulary, if you will, for any production you want to do. And then collaborating for the comfort of the singer and for the requirement of the director.
Yeah, and it's interesting to me to think of the communication skills of director and choreographer, for instance, and how those skills either pulled people in and made them commit and really work hard, or if the communication skills were lacking, um, I I can't help but think that it shows in the production. You know,
It hugely does. And what you're also referring to, Pat, is the collaborative conversations that happen before the singers arrive are in depth and unavoidable.
Yep.
So that a unified and articulate game plan, as it were, can be presented from moment one. And I've gotten in the habit of writing a letter to casts about 3 weeks out from the first rehearsal, just preparing them as much as I can for things they should be reading, things they should be looking at, things they should be starting to imagine, so they don't smack hard into it on day one.
That's really smart.
Well, and just inviting them into a conversation with me, even if I don't know them, one way or the other, to get them in the groove, as it were.
Yeah, yeah.
The other part that this implies, of course, is the casting process. Includes who can move. Not to mention how much farther ahead of the game a singer is going to be if they've already sung the role,
Yeah, 100%.
And if you're taking the piece to a new time and place, how available are they to that? The transposition, for instance, of La Boheme to World War II seems interesting, except there's no place in the Puccini that ever mentions the Nazis or what was going on in Paris at that time. And so increasingly over the years, I watched Peter work hard to make it seem like it was part of the world. Turning Colline into a Jew, and you know what I mean? He worked really hard on the mise en scène to make sure it was not just tacked on around the edges. And I appreciated that.
Yeah.
But again, you asked the question, what does it add? I suppose in the best intentions are that it raises the stakes.
Yeah, and that
it makes life more precious.
If you feel like a production is resonant, like it's all hanging together in a where it has emotional resonance, where I'm feeling what's going on, then to me it's successful. If all that stuff feels emotionally resonant, then we've succeeded.
Absolutely. As I say, personally, I have found that my time is better spent anchoring the piece in its emotional, psychological values than on asking people to go out on a limb to recontextualize those things. That's just my personal taste as a director, because I very often find that everybody is grateful for time spent being meticulous about the moment to moment inner workings, rather than on the external qualities of the piece.
I think that's true. I have no like summary. I've just, I enjoyed the conversation.
Well, I think we could summarize by encouraging. I mean, I want to encourage, I'm going to say, I want to encourage our audiences to do a couple things. One is, whether you're going to the opera house or to the theater, enjoy preparing yourself. Read the play, listen to the opera, read the libretto, do a little bit of that, just a little bit of that homework, and it'll position you for a very different experience.
I agree.
And then be adventurous. Give it a chance. Start to open your heart and your mind to possibility, to discovery, to nuance. Instead of waiting for the expected to happen, surrender that to the unexpected, which can happen when a piece is framed slightly differently. And then just see as much and as varied kinds of opera and musical theater as you can here in our amazing community.
It really is an amazing.
Where you can see the nitty gritty stuff that an opera theater is going to do. The Cradle Will Rock this spring. Mark Blitzstein's gritty piece. And Minnesota Opera is going to dazzle with, classic repertoire done beautifully. And so that range of experience, I think these interpretive choices are an invitation to the vitality of the art form.
Oh, I love that. That's perfect. Yeah, because that's how it feels to me, that it is a vital art form. And, I want it to be something that's appreciated even more widely and deeply, I think.
Well, one of the things we didn't talk about, but it's for another time, is the way these smaller companies, let's just say it, and the Minnesota Opera in the ecology, all have their distinct constituencies.
Mm-hmm.
This is opera for women by women, or so it seems, but it's not.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just that.
Mm-hmm.
This is opera for people over 55. Well, it's not. It's for everybody.
Right.
And so as much as the organizations are finding their focus, which these days might have a socio-political touchstone, it's still storytelling.
That's right.
And if the storytelling isn't vital, none of the rest matters to me, because I don't need to go. Even if I'm going to see a piece of agitprop by Kurt Weill or Mark Blitzstein or whoever, I'm still interested in the relationships that are put to the test by those socio-political circumstances.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we have to close with giving a little plug for our Raison d'Etre Valentine's Day event, which is going to happen on February 11th at 3:30 at the Thelma Hunter Room at Landmark Center. And we'd love you all to come and hear That's Amore and a bunch of other wonderful songs. So thanks so much for listening to us today. And we hope to see you on our upcoming productions. Thank you so much. Thanks, Gary.
Thank you, Pat.